Let's start with the Knicks. Nice win last night against the Pacers, but it's really a bigger thing with this team and how well they've been playing. So let's get into all of it. All right, last night, no Randall, no OG against the Pacers, who have Halliburton on a minutes restriction, so he played 22 minutes. This game came right down to the wire. Brunson hits the shot with 146 remaining, puts the Knicks up 101 to 100. He's got 40 on a night where he's not even hitting his threes like he normally does. And I think the post-game moment, if you've seen the video, where he's being interviewed by Alan Hahn. It's just awesome stuff. The crowd's going crazy. His popularity in New York City right now is maybe up there with any other athlete, maybe until the Yankees start. But serious, like, in the other part of the Brunson story is that for him to be the guy, and the guy and a guy could be two different things, but for him to be announced to the All-Star game, to have another night like this in MSG, where I don't care if you hate New York City, that place is so much fun when it's on. And for all the years of the Knicks waiting to kind of get their guy, and Carmelo was, in a way that, but there clearly wasn't the playoff success. For to be somebody who's been an underdog essentially his entire NBA career, this is just one of those moments that I think anybody would feel good about. So, and by the way, how about on the side there after the OG trade, Precious Achua, 12 points, 16 boards, 4 steals, 2 blocks. I couldn't believe he took 16 shots last night. That's the most shots he's taken in a game in over a calendar year. So you're going to go all the way back to January 23. And he's just super active, and he was going to take more shots because Randall's not there, and obviously Mitchell Robinson's still out. So the Knicks have won 9 straight. They were 17-15 to now 32-17. So they're 15-2 in their last 17. Let's look at the stats. In January 1st, when this whole thing started, their offense is 7th in the league. The defense is number 1. They have the number 1 net rating. Some of the other numbers I was looking at, I was like, okay, they do seem to go slow because of Brunson dictating the pace. That is the case since January 1st, 28th in pace. But then when you look at the other teams down at the bottom of pace, how about this list? The Clippers, 25th. That's because of Harden. 26th, Minnesota. 27th is Denver. And then you have New York 28th, and even 29 and 30 are Orlando and Miami. And despite Miami being through a really disappointing stretch and Orlando flattening a bit, these are actually all pretty good teams. So, I don't know if that means anything, but you just can't look at pace and be dismissive of a team that plays a little bit slower and continues to win. I think there could be something to be said about it being the schedule. The Knicks are 20th in strength of schedule in the NBA so far this season. The stretch has a couple nice wins in there. They've got Denver, they've got Philly with Embiid, Minnesota, but there's also just a lot of stuff in there. And that plays out if you look at their expanded standings on how they do against the good teams versus the bad teams. The Knicks are still just 11-16 against teams that are 500 or better, but they're 21-1 against teams below 500. If you look at Boston, they're still 21-10 against teams over 500. Milwaukee's 14-10. Minnesota's 19-10. OKC 16-10. The Clippers are 15-11, which is probably misleading in itself because they feel like two different teams this year. But that could also be something in New York's favor, which I'll get to. So the Knicks are a half game behind the 2 seed. Milwaukee loses to Portland. Like Milwaukee, and we'll see what happens with Doc once he's been there a month, but every time you hear about all the turmoil with Milwaukee, or you're watching them and you go, okay, but look at the record. Like, they're still good. And then they just have this incredibly bad loss where you're like, what's wrong with these guys? Shout out to DeAndre Ayton saying, this is what we do. Boston's had a brutal week. Asses handed to them by the Clippers. They had lost to Denver for their first home loss. That game was a bit of a toss-up. But then last night against the Lakers, Doc Rivers theory in effect, no LeBron, no AD, and the Lakers just shot him out of the building. And then you have Philly now without the Embiid stuff, or without Embiid because of the stuff involving his knee injury. So if you're looking at the Knicks as of today, and the season is just a bunch of different snapshots, and I'd say that even the best teams have usually 1 or 2 stretches where you're like, what's wrong with those guys? But the Knicks are rolling, and the only thing that, they're overshadowing Cleveland because it's New York, but the Cleveland story is remarkable because they were 13-12 to now 30-16. They've won 12 of 13. But if you look at the strength of schedule and some of the scheduling opponent stuff, there's a very similar story there. And who Cleveland has been is also the same as New York. Cleveland's strength of schedule is 21st. They're 10-14 against teams 500 or better, and 20-2 against the sub 500 teams. So both these teams are just, if you're not good, you're losing to them. But really the lesson might be here that it's about judging the Knicks with OG Anunoby. Despite missing last night, he's played 14 games. This is the best he has ever shot it in his career. And some of my hesitation with OG in the past has just been like the numbers for the way he would get talked about, knowing what he is going to cost. I always felt like, man, I don't really know if he's that kind of guy. Like everybody'd want him, but is he really going to be that kind of dude that deserves that kind of cash? Because there's some numbers, if you dug into them, especially the numbers, the metrics with him with Toronto this year, they just actually got like legitimately not great. So the trade made sense because OG provides them somebody that can match up against the bigger perimeter players defensively in a way RJ Barrett could never even dream of. And OG, despite some of the handle stuff that I worry about, his corner three stuff is ridiculous. He's 42% from corner threes for his career. He's 48% on corner threes right now with the Knicks. So this is great. They're rolling. Brunson continues to shatter through any limitations you put on him as a player. The record stuff gives me a bit of pause here against the good teams versus the bad teams. But when you watch them play, you're like, man, they have 9 guys. When you look at their top 9, and that's without Mitchell right now, there's not a lot of minutes where you're like, why is that guy getting minutes? It feels like everybody makes sense out there. I mean, we could nitpick here and talk about Miles McBride, but he's out there for his defense, and he shot it well in January. Grimes is a rotation player in a ton of teams. DiVincenzo, this is the best he's ever played. Hartenstein is terrific. That guy is all over the place all game long. Everybody could use a Josh Hart. And instead of having quickly kind of just come in with that second unit and just do whatever he wants to do, despite it being really good, especially last year on big nights. And then RJ, who you just wanted to click, but I don't think Tibbs was ever that big of a fan. Defensively, he's not even close to OG. And when you factor in that really Barrett had one good year shooting it from 3, and then the rest of it was kind of disappointing for somebody who's a smaller perimeter player that was going to take a lot of shots, like 14, 15 shots a game. Well, you give those shots to OG, or in other cases, you're splitting them up. So I really like what I see from them. And even though that schedule stuff, and there'll probably be a moment where you go, why were the Knicks so good during that stretch? Well, maybe it's just baked into who they were playing, but it's a little dismissive to just break it down to only that, knowing that with OG, despite like the spike of the numbers that he's had here with New York, because some of them are outliers for his career, that's who we need to judge this team being moving forward. Eastern Conference Finals, maybe. I know I'm supposed to say it because they're 15-2 in the last 17. I still am not there yet. Like the Knicks winning the East. I'm not even saying that yet. I'm saying Eastern Conference Finals. But depending on the nights where you watch Milwaukee, you're like, is it that impossible? But then you're kind of like, all right, but how are they going to deal with all that size? So look, the fact that I'm working myself through it is probably the biggest concession that I can make on the Knicks to this point, which I would have been completely dismissive of even that idea 30 days ago.